Good morning. Thank you for joining us on this final day of Beyond Digitization, a virtual symposium. My name is Megan Sniffen-Marinoff, University Archivist at Harvard, and one of the many contributors to the Colonial North America at Harvard Library project, a decade in the making. A number of you have been participating in this symposium for the past 2 days. Thanks for returning. To others who are joining for the first time, welcome. We're delighted that you're here today. If you were not present at the start of this symposium series, you will notice a slight change in some of the Zoom backgrounds you'll see here today. As we discovered more about the content across the libraries and thought more over the years about what it revealed, we concluded that a more accurate title for the final work is Worlds of Change, Colonial North America at Harvard Library. I will not spend the short time we have today to explain that in detail again. The reasons for this change will be reflected in new text that we will be adding to the website in coming weeks. We chose to celebrate all of the work of this digital project, beginning with a brief description on Tuesday about the multi-layered process of working across 15 of Harvard's libraries to identify, process, conserve, image, and make available the 700,000 pages that we found. We were fortunate that our keynote speaker, historian Karen Wolf, not only put this project and other digital work into the framing context of those three simple but complex words, vast early America, but she also set the stage for a look forward to how these and other digitized archives and manuscripts might be used to expand and to rethink long-held historical assumptions. Our panelists yesterday began that conversation with examples and a wide-ranging discussion about the effects of digitizing archival and manuscript materials on teaching, research, and the development of new tools for research. They also touched on the need to develop the discussion on the ethical issues inherent in these types of projects and digitization overall. Today, our panelists will take this in another direction, especially as we more fully enter an age of abundance of digitized materials. Work is underway to consider new ways that users might be able to engage with this content that remains complex, is challenging to access, and collectively is beyond the scope of any one individual to fully absorb. And as we engage with this material at scale, we turn our attention to areas ranging from crowdsourcing to artificial intelligence and machine learning. There's a lot to discuss. Before I turn things over to our moderator, there's a little housekeeping I need to address. Recordings of today's sessions, in fact, recordings of all 3 symposium days, will be available later in April, as will any slideshows that panelists would like to make widely accessible. As the panelists progress through their talks, you may enter questions for them in the Q&A feature on your screen. We'll be monitoring these questions throughout the meeting. Over the past few days of the symposium, we've been receiving far more questions than panelists can address in these sessions, so we'll make an attempt to address them in weeks to come. Also, a quick reminder that we have a very special event planned for the end of the meeting, so do stick around. We'll be joined by Jeffrey Page and Diane Paulus, co-directors of an upcoming American Repertory Theater production, a bold new re-envisioning of the Tony Award-winning musical 1776. They will introduce a clip from the multimedia conversation, 1776, The Audacity to Exist. So let me now introduce Stu Snydman, who will moderate today's panel. Stu is Associate University Librarian and Managing Director for Library Technology at Harvard University. He has served as Director of Harvard's Library Technology Services since July of 2019, joining Harvard after serving the Stanford University Libraries for over 20 years. Stu leads LTS in planning and developing the library technology portfolio and maintaining reliable enterprise library applications to facilitate search, discovery, and access to knowledge. LTS also designs solutions to enable creation of world-class scholarly collections through acquisition, collaboration, and digital repository services. For nearly 20 years, Stu has led the development of innovative open source technologies used to showcase special collections and archives, including Spotlight, the platform upon which CNA was built. He also helped organize Fantastic Futures an international conference series focused on applications of artificial intelligence in libraries, archives, and museums. I'll turn it over now to Stu.
Thank you, Megan, for that introduction. And I'm honored and pleased to participate in this wonderful event, and I'm so grateful to the panelists for lending your expertise to this topic. The first 2 days were so compelling, taking us through the origins of this important project to the impact it's had on research, instruction, and broad access. And today we get a glimpse into the future, well, the present and the future. As Megan said, the title of our panel is Seeing at Scale, Artificial Intelligence and Access to Manuscript Materials. As we've learned over the past 2 days, the worlds of change, Colonial North America project and Harvard Library makes available to researchers, students, and the public nearly 700,000 pages of beautifully scanned manuscript material. Engaging with the substance of that much material is beyond the scope of any individual person working page by page, document by document. But there are at least 2 notable ways we have begun to engage with these collections at scale, and we'll talk about today: crowds and computers. Crowdsourcing, which in this case refers to enlisting large groups of usually, but not always, volunteers to collectively transcribe and analyze scanned documents, has proven effective, but requires significant management, oversight, and person hours. Artificial intelligence and the techniques derived from machine learning and deep learning offer more automated and potentially sophisticated means of seeing and analyzing large corpora and more efficiently. While the technology for converting scanned images of printed text to machine readable formats, what we refer to as optical character recognition or OCR, is relatively mature, the technology for recognizing and converting handwritten materials has long been far more challenging, especially when materials are from different eras, in different languages, and in varying hands. AI has been a game changer for handwriting recognition, and these technologies are at the center of cutting-edge projects, many of which you'll hear about today, that are attempting to open access to the contents of large manuscript and archival collections like never before. And while these efforts have the great potential to enable new research questions and methodologies, the applications of artificial intelligence to the study of our cultural record may also lead us to interesting ethical questions about the role of computers and algorithms in constructing and shaping histories and influencing new narratives about the past. So I'm excited, as I'm sure you are, to listen to this morning's slate of talks where our speakers will touch upon questions such as, what are the potential points of convergence and complementarity between crowdsourcing methods and computational methods? What is the state of the art of using AI and machine learning to organize, interpret, transcribe, and interact with manuscript material? Manuscripts from the colonial era are marked by their inconsistency of hand and multilingual nature. How are these challenges and attributes being addressed? And what issues, practical, technical, ethical, are unique to computational approaches to the problem of access and description at scale? We have an amazing slate of panelists and speakers today, some quite local, but several joining us from quite a distance and at all hours of the night and morning. Our panelists include Tom Blake, Content Discovery Manager from the Boston Public Library, and Samantha Blickhand, Humanities Lead for Zooniverse and the co-director of the Zooniverse team, the Adler Planetarium in Chicago. Maxime Gohier, Professor of History, Department of Letters and Humanities, University of Quebec at Rimouski. We'll be presenting with Jean-Francois Palomino, Map Librarian and Coordinator at the Department of Research and Dissemination of Heritage Collections, the National Library and Archives of Canada. Donatella Firmani, Assistant Professor, Engineering Department, Computer Science and Automation, Roma Tre University, joining us from Italy. Welcome. Noelani Arista, Associate Professor and Director of Indigenous Studies, Department of History and Classics, Hawaiian at McGill University, but joining us in the very early morning from Hawaii. Thank you. And Matt Cook, Digital Scholarship Program Manager from Harvard Library. So I will now turn it over to Tom and Samantha for their presentation.
Hello. I just want to thank all of the organizers for having us. We're really excited to be here and to hear from all the other panelists. Today, we are going to briefly present on an ongoing collaboration between the Zooniverse crowdsourcing platform, the Boston Public Library, the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, and over 10,000 volunteer transcribers. This effort began in 2016 when the Zooniverse team received a national leadership grant from the IMLS to better support galleries, libraries, archives, and museums in their use of Zooniverse for crowdsourced research efforts. This funding allowed us to create 2 bespoke text transcription projects as part of our research goals to understand how the tools that we provide on our platform can affect transcription output in particular. I think I'm going to turn it over to Tom now.
Sure. Hi there. Do we have the slides up? Or do I need to do that?
Oh, here.
Cool. Okay. I'm Tom Blake. I'm the Content Discovery Manager at the Boston Public Library. And when Zooniverse approached us with this project idea, I got to say, this was probably the coolest idea and has been the coolest project I've worked on in the 20 years that I've been working with digital projects. Not just because of the promise of production, before this whole idea of crowdsourcing, the direction we seemed to go in was let's hire professional transcribers, and it just cost a lot of money, took a long period of time. So the promise of getting this done quickly or relatively quickly with hundreds, if not thousands of people around the globe was really compelling. But beyond the production, really one of the most interesting and gratifying things about this project was the level of engagement and the community that was built up around this project. And then thinking about, wow, we're going to have all this transcribed text that at least until now cannot be recognized by an OCR engine. And what are we going to do with this? And Sam's going to talk a little more about that later. But in addition to the text that was transcribed, we also generated thousands, if not tens of thousands of lines of discussion from our transcriber community about the project, whether it was just asking questions about handwriting, or some people really dove into the history of some of the letters. I mean, you can see right now the letter that's on the screen is headlined with "Unrighteous Laws to be Resisted." And I think that actually can be a theme of this entire symposium. We're really breaking the norms here. We're going beyond just digitizing stuff, and we're really thinking about what else we can do with this. Our community members, we had over 10,000 registered volunteers. They transcribed over 12,000 individual items, generated 1.5 million lines of text. If you look through the discussion board, you will see people introducing themselves, and the motivation for people participating in this for no money. People were, this is 2.5 years of work, and one pandemic later, everything is done. We heard from people who were descended from slaves that wanted to participate. We heard from people who were descended from slave owners who wanted to participate as a form of reparations. We heard from a Buddhist monk in Nepal who incorporated this work as part of his meditation ritual. So, like I said, beyond the production, just the community that was built up around this was pretty cool. So what did we get out of all? So you can see on the screen here, this is the Zooniverse module that they built for us. You see an image of text, and you get to transcribe it. And what do we get out of all this? Next slide. So this is what we get out of, so 2.5 years, we have all this gobbledygook. So what is this? This is a JSON version of the data output. So this includes the actual transcribed text. It includes user data, it includes positional data, it includes slope. It is incredibly granular and rich. If you can't read it, that's okay. It's meant for the machines and the robots. And Sam's going to talk about that in a little bit. So what did we turn this into? Next slide, please. So all that for this, simple blue line underlining some discovered text. So our primary mission was obviously to be able to allow users to really pinpoint full text queries located on the page, and then take the entire corpus and do even more magic with us. So even though this looks like a simple line of blue text, the fact that it's showing up on a manuscript page that's pretty amazing in my mind. So again, this is as Stu mentioned, this is the perfect communion of man and machine. So we have people supplying the text, but then we have automated processes for examining it and helping us kind of like relocate things. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Sam, and she's going to talk about even cooler things than a thin blue line.
Oh, I don't know. I think searchability is pretty cool. But I will introduce you to a sort of follow-up project that we have developed using the results of this crowd-generated transcription data. So I'm going to take the rest of our time to just tell you about this project, which is called Optimizing Crowdsourced Transcription Using Handwritten Text Recognition. I am leading this effort with my co-PI, Ben Wiggins from the University of Minnesota, and our data scientist, Suhail Al-Nahari, who's also based at the University of Minnesota. So this is an experiment in using volunteer transcribed output to not only train a model for handwritten text recognition that can be used in conjunction with the tools we built for the Anti-Slavery Manuscripts project, but it's basically a prototyping effort to see whether these tools can be incorporated into the crowdsourcing platform in the long run. So over a 3-month period, we will use this anti-slavery manuscripts corpus to train our HTR model. And this work builds on previous training done on a smaller scale in 2018 using early output from the same crowdsourcing project. I'll speak a little bit more about that later. The second part of this effort is that we are going to build a custom data pipeline to ingest these machine-generated transcription data into the crowdsourcing workflow so that the drop-down menu that Tom showed you earlier will essentially be pre-populated with machine transcription data, and volunteers on the platform will then be asked to verify the accuracy of the machine transcriptions or edit those transcriptions and resubmit them. So essentially, we are going to be skipping the part where a volunteer has to generate the positional data by underlining text in an image, and also removing the initial transcription step, pardon me. And then the final activity, which is an attempt at transfer learning. So this will allow us to accurately measure the degree to which the HTR model we're training is generalizable to other corpora. And as a result, we can provide insight into whether this type of transfer learning, so transfer learning is training an algorithm on one corpus and then updating it with potentially many fewer transcriptions from other corpora. We're going to be seeing whether that is expected to be successful and what quantities of transcribed text might be required from other collections to achieve similar HTR results as the anti-slavery manuscripts corpus. I will also note the other corpora will be similar to anti-slavery manuscripts in terms of language and time period, but we have included a range of examples to try and see where the limits are of the applicability of this transfer learning process. To date, our work has resulted in HTR that achieves 84% character accuracy, and with the proposed expansion of our training data during this effort, we've only really just kicked this off in the past month. But with this proposed expansion of the training data, we do expect to significantly improve upon that 16% character error rate. So once this prototyping effort is complete, we will apply for additional funding to scale up. And in the long term, we do expect to facilitate more handwritten text transcription projects with higher accuracy and shorter timelines for completion. One other thing to note here, and something that I do hope we'll be able to get into more later on in the session, is that automation is not for every crowdsourcing project or even for every data set. And practitioners do need to be clear and upfront with their project volunteers about what their labor is being used for, as well as making it clear what the automated process will be used for once it's created, and additional information such as whether it will be made publicly available, etc. So I'm just going to quickly touch on some related efforts here. Data science students at the University of Minnesota have already begun using Zooniverse generated data to identify best practices for things like automated page segmentation and HTR, as well as more generally how to incorporate crowdsourcing project, or pardon me, how to incorporate machine learning supported text transcription into crowdsourcing projects on the Zooniverse platform. And the activities proposed here will build on this existing research into machine readable text, but will also be informed by the work being done to incorporate machine learning into projects in a number of different disciplines across this Zooniverse platform, including ecology, astrophysics, and biomedicine. And I've included some references here, and I'm very happy to make our slides available after this if you want to follow up on any of those other pieces of research being produced. So with that, I will conclude. I'm really looking forward to the Q&A session, and I want to thank Tom for joining me today in this presentation, and looking forward to hearing the rest of the presentations.
Okay, thank you to Sam and Tom. Really interesting stuff, especially the convergence of crowdsourcing with machine learning technologies. I'd like to now hand it over to Maxime Guerrier and Jean-Francois Palomino for their presentation.
Thank you, Stu. Hello, everyone. So I'm Jean-Francois Palomino, Research and Heritage Collections Coordinator at Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales du Québec. I'm here today with Maxime Goyer, Professor of History at Université du Québec à Rimouski. 2 days ago, Karen Wolf mentioned the concept of vast early America, a concept quite attractive for us French people of the North. In her presentation, she also mentioned the archival silences that we all want to uncover as librarians, archivists, or historians. The project we want to present relates in some way to this vast early America, and we think it will help historians to see New France at a different scale, helping them to discover the ordinary people living their life in New France. This project is entitled Nouvelle France numérique, and its goal is to work towards the large-scale coordinate transcription of French colonial North American sources. Founded by the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, this project is still in its early stages. It combines AI technologies with a semi-crowdsourcing approach. Involved in the project are, on one hand, researchers interested in New France, and on the other hand, heritage institutions wishing to have their archival materials transcribed. The project uses Transcribers, a platform that relies on HTR technology. The platform allows users to work collectively so transcriptions can be correct and also marked with the TEI markup language. For an institution such as BANQ, the benefits are obvious, as its digital collections are online for over 20 years with a great range of digitized materials. For at least the past 10 years, printed texts have been scanned using OCR technology. The results are remarkable. Searching, for example, with the name Roosevelt, sorry for this not so colonial name. So in our two main catalogs, we found about 500 digital documents. but the same research in the digital collection found about 90,000 results thanks to the full text search. Researchers are obviously delighted. Whereas in the past, they could spend hours paging through original materials or scrolling through microfilm looking for a word, now they are able to find that same word much more quickly with digitized and transcribed materials. While the effects have mostly been positive, this development has, however, put aside important non-digitized collections, as well as handwritten materials, especially those from the 17th and 18th centuries, which cannot be processed using OCR because of the substantial variation in handwriting styles. So we were observing the development of HTR with great interest. Bibliothèque et Archives nationales du Québec's involvement in the Nouvelle-France Numérique project means staff can learn about this promising new technology. In the project, the first step is for the Cultural Heritage Institution to provide reproductions of archival materials so they can be uploaded to transcribers. Algorithms trained by researchers analyze the images and generate XML files. These files can be corrected by researchers and by members of the general public. Once a certain quality threshold has been reached, the XML files are exported to the archival institution's digital collection. To date, about 75,000 images have been transcribed with results that differ from one collection to another. Following those transcriptions and others to come, we expect some nice discoveries, notably from the Ordonnance of the Intendant, which concern various aspects of day-to-day life in New France. The transcriptions of court records and notarial records, so often difficult to read, will also be a blessing for those seeking for the presence of common people in New France. So Professor Goyer, Maxime, will now say a few words about the platform and transcription models that have been generated as part of this project.
Yes, thank you, Jean-François. So as Jean-François mentioned, the Nouvelle-France Numérique project relies on the use of the Transcribus platform for the transcription of handwritten documents. Transcribus is a free software developed by the European cooperative READ and using the HTR technology based on deep neural networks. The software is designed to associate digital images of archival documents with their transcriptions. It provides image segmentation tools, which identify the pixel coordinates of each line of text within the page and allows each line to be associated with the corresponding transcription. These images and transcriptions can then be used for training neural networks to recognize various graphical forms that each character can take. The result of this training process, the HTR model, is an algorithm that can be used to automatically transcribe a set of a large set of historical documents. Transcriptions produced in XML format, as Jean-François said, use any character sets from the Unicode consortium. So recognition models can be trained in any language with any script type for any historical period. The performance of HDR technology have evolved rapidly in the last years, thanks to the increase of its use. Indeed, the transcription of large collections of documents in order to produce training data combined with advances in neural network research have allowed great improvement in the performance of segmentation tools, of HTR algorithms, and by the same token, of the efficiency of recognition models. When we started using Transcribus 3 years ago, the best performing models hardly achieved error rates of less than 10% of characters, and more frequently around 20% of characters. At this rate, it was faster and easier to transcribe document manually and to correct errors. Now it is quite easy to train models achieving error rates under 8% of characters. Via the Transcribus platform, the READ Co-op shares handwriting recognition models developed by archive institutions and research groups partners in the cooperative. Up to now, there are over 60 of such public models available, trained in 13 different languages for different script type and different historical periods. These models can be used directly to decipher documents if they're suiting the language, or as a base to train models more suited to a particular script type or new languages. Up to now, the most advanced and robust of these models are based on several thousands of pages of transcriptions, making training data sets of hundreds of thousands or millions of words. The general model for English, for instance, is based on 1.2 million words taken from documents produced in the Transcribe Bentham project from the Library of London, and includes documents produced between the 18th and 20th centuries and has an average character error rate of 6.32%. In the background, however, users have trained more than 8,000 private models for a huge variety of languages and script type. And many people willingly share these models with other users, a practice facilitated by the cooperative approach of the Transcribers platform. As part of the Nouvelle France Numérique project, we have so far developed various models for recognizing French documents from the 17th and 18th centuries. Our more robust model to date is based on over 1,000 pages of correspondence exchanged by governors and intendants of Canada and Louisiana with the French Minister of Navy at Versailles. This model is based on a lexicon of more than 200,000 words and includes a variety of scripts, which are, however, relatively standard given the homogeneity of the writing practices among the administrative elite of the Ancien Régime. The model achieves an error rate of 4.87% of characters on the validation dataset, which is made up of a random sample of 10% of the training data. It was then used to automatically transcribe around 35,000 pages of the Louisiana correspondence. Tests conducted on these transcriptions shows results statistically quite encouraging, with error rates generally ranging from 3 to 8%. We have also trained models more suited to homogeneous archival series produced by very few writers. In these cases, we have reached fairly good results with less than 150 pages of transcriptions. For instance, we have transcribed the 9,500 pages of the Intendants Ordonnances of New France with a specific model based on 130 pages of transcription, a model which attained an error rate of only 5.66%. Obviously, several factors can influence the performance of HTR model for transcribing historical documents. These factors relate both to the data set used in training model and to the documents to which the models are applied. The regularity and homogeneity of script is probably the most important factor. A good model is not necessarily the one with the biggest amount of training data. When a corpus is made up of a variety of scripts, it is more difficult for algorithms to identify the different graphic forms of each characters. In these circumstances, very robust models trained on a wide variety of documents is necessary to achieve reasonable performance. On the other hand, when dealing with corpus of documents written by a singular author, it might even be preferable to limit the amount of training data in order to decrease the risk of errors due to confusion. The size of the lexicon is also an important factor, as the transcription suggested by the algorithm is based on two main factors. First, the probability of matching each graphic sign with a singular character. And second, the probability that the identified character string effectively forms a word, which is part of a lexicon. Given the great variability of spelling prior to the 20th century, it is sometimes useful to increase the lexicon in order to adapt to this reality. However, the recognition of series of archives containing very specific lexicons, such as notarial acts, judicial archives, censuses, or account books, is sometimes facilitated by the use of models more limited in size, but more suited to the particular lexicon of these documents. Thirdly, it is absolutely essential to feed the model with transcriptions of high quality, since any error in the training data will inevitably reverberate on the recognition results. It is thus important to establish and follow protocols in order to ensure regularity in the transcription process. Performance of a model is also inevitably limited by the physical quality of the documents to be recognized. While it is evident that documents badly preserved or damaged will be harder to or impossible to decipher, other physical characteristics can also have an impact. For example, when the paper has absorbed a lot of ink, the software will have difficulty distinguishing the text written on each side of the paper. But as strange as it may sound, the quality of digitization is not the most important factor. as very few pixels are required to identify a character. It is thus possible to achieve good results of HDR with images resolution as low as 100 dot per inch, allowing old scans from microfilms to be used with a certain efficiency. Once documents are automatically transcribed, several ways are available with transcribers to correct the remaining errors and improve the quality of transcription. Within the Nouvelle France Numérique project, we have so far relied almost exclusively on research assistants to review and correct transcriptions. This method is particularly effective since it relies on regular supervision and ensures uniformity of work, but nevertheless requires relatively large financial investment to pay the labor. In the long term, however, we are counting on the development of a collaborative movement among the research community. By giving researchers access to large amounts of transcribed data, we hope that they will contribute in exchange by correcting the documents they will consult and work on. We also hope to organize, in collaboration with Archive Center's partners to the project, crowdsourcing activities, where citizens will be involved in the process of correction. As the number of corrected transcriptions will increase, it will also become possible to improve the recognition models and use them again over documents badly transcribed. Finally, it is possible to develop new computational tools to automatically identify and correct errors, an option that is, however, costly, but which we contemplate for the last phase of the project in the next 2 or 3 years. On the basis of the results obtained so far, we consider that the main challenges to be met in order to increase the quality and quantity of the data produced in our project consist, first of all, in training more robust and flexible models. Our goal is in this regard, is to develop a recognition model based on over 5,000 pages of perfectly corrected transcripts gathered from the different collections we work on. We also plan to use this general model to train specific models for serial archives, such as notarial and judicial collections. Another very stimulating perspective is to create models for native language using handwritten dictionaries and grammar books. We have started working on different Abenaki dictionaries, one of which have been furnished us by the Houghton Library in Harvard. We also expect to expand the pool of contributors to increase the possibilities of work and to provide easier access to materials by creating a digital repository accessible to the large public. Altogether, theoretically effective, a collaborative model like the one we are trying to develop nevertheless poses certain issues from the point of view of researchers. First of all, experience shows us that the motivation of several contributors is hampered by the difficulty in adapting to new technologies. Using Transcribus requires spending time learning its features, and many are discouraged by the slowness of their progress. We find the same problem with learning the basic of XML, a non-intuitive language that seems off-putting to many. In addition, such a collaborative project requires significant coordination effort to ensure that all participants apply transcription protocols in a uniform manner, while their contributions falls within the framework of their research projects, all based on different objectives and constraints. When it comes to the use of crowdsourcing, this is a practice that requires a considerable investment of time to ensure the consistency and quality of the data produced. Jean-François.
So, well, as you can see, the Nouvelle France Numérique project has great potential for improving access to its partners' funds and archival collections. I will just let it there, and you can see some issues of BANQ, but just to give time to the other speakers and then time for questions after the presentations. So, and I hope we will find some answers to our questions here today. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Maxime and Jean-François. Another really compelling example of the importance of bringing experts and the crowd together with automation. So thank you for that. We will now turn it over to Donatella Firmani for your presentation. Take it away.
Okay, here we go. Hope everybody sees my screen correctly. So hi everyone. So I'll take a slightly different take with respect to other talks. Let me try to introduce the project in Codice Ratio that we are developing at University of Roma Tre in Italy. So our idea was to collaborate together with the Vatican Archives in order to build a sort of search tool over their collection of manuscripts. So our initial inspiration was how do we query the web right now with recent tools. So for instance, when we ask a question to the Google web search, we can ask direct questions, and what we get back is not really only a collection of documents referring to that question, but really we get the answer precisely. So for instance, if we ask for who is the director of Apocalypse Now, we get we get precisely the answer, which is Francis Ford Coppola. So in order to do that, so we get also the list of documents, but we mainly get the direct answer. So in order to do that, of course, Google has access to a huge, impressive collection of web pages, and somehow it manages to answer those questions by building and relying on a huge data artifact with high quality, which is known as the Google Knowledge Graph. So we do have persons, places connected by relations, and we can directly access those facts by querying this data structure. So somehow we were fascinated by the Vatican Secret Archives, as somehow it was the web as a collection of pages, of documents, and we decided to start querying it and build this knowledge graph, as in case of Google for the web. So this, of course, is a very ambitious project. So, and somehow we had to take the first step first, which is doing the handwritten text transcription. Due to the high heterogeneity of documents in the Vatican Secret Archives, of course, we had to deal with the presence of a variety of handwritten styles. So how does it work at the text transcription? Of course, we take the image and we need to produce the searchable text. So the HTR as we know it, which is widely used in literature, we take the word or lines and we as input, and we get back the transcription. So the input for the HTR is really either the word or the entire line of the manuscript. So somehow we are teaching the system to read the text lines. So why is that? And then we get back the automatically predicts the automatically predicted lines. So why this is an issue in our context? Because in order to do that for our application, we need the full transcriptions for a variety of text fonts, which is not somehow feasible for that kind of variety of handwritten documents, because full text transcription needs to be done by experts. Of course, experts join voluntarily transcription projects, as we know, but somehow the effort for doing that at scale is not typically doable. So our goal in this sense was doing things at scale, and at scales means leveraging also not just a crowd of experts, which can be small and difficult to hire for that variety, to leverage a crowd of non-experts, different other projects. So our crowd is consists of people that do not necessarily have ground in the area, and we tried to adapt the crowdsourcing task somehow removing all the difficulties due to the lack of paleographic or historical skills. So this boils down. Of course, this needs to be done for a variety of scripts. We started from this one, and this boils down truly to, so we build this web app for hiring crowds of non-experts, and the web app works as follows. We do have the image of words as processed by the digitization, cleaning, and binarization decompose the word into pieces like in a jigsaw puzzle and ask the crowd not to annotate the word, but to solve this kind of CAPTCHA problems. So rather than asking what is the full transcription of this piece of text, we ask people to select and annotate only pieces of the puzzle that correspond to a certain shape, which corresponds to a letter. Select those shapes, selects a variety of those shapes to cover the occurrences that they see in text. And non-experts need only to solve this kind of coloring problem, which is akin to the CAPTCHA problems that we see everywhere in websites. So this has been done in practice, enrolling high school students, volunteer. And so far we enrolled 700 students from different high schools in Italy. And we were able to process 10 million images with no expert, I mean, only experts for setting up the initial task. So of course, this is theory. So this is the main idea. In practice, this of course, behind the curtains, there are a lot of more of technical problems that need to be solved to set up those things correctly, because it is not easy, of course, to somehow, rather than run a combinatorial process based on sorry, there was some problem here. Based on language models to get the description back. So results are reasonably good for this kind of, for being non-expert crowdsourcing. And we were able to get somehow more than 60% descriptions, so those are in green. And interestingly, words that were not corrected exactly transcribed just with 1 or 2 errors, which makes totally acceptable results for building search engines as an application. Of course, this project has some spin-offs. So far, we build everything assuming that we don't have expert transcriptions, which means that we cannot accept access private pages or lines. Of course, if we do have, can do something which is different. And we developed an approach that helps people inserting trained data and supporting experts in their deployed we are deploying this system here in Italy at the in collaboration with the Vatican Archives, and so far we are trying to experiment and see where they feel comfortable in accessing and their annotation in a collaborative manner. And behind, of course, we have trained models. So straight to the conclusions, we really are trying to build knowledge extraction systems for accessing and indexing the Vatican Secret Archives documents. And of course, this is a complex, and we focus so far on HTR, and in particular, we focused on two ways of addressing the fact that traditional HTR requires a significant annotation effort. Our two strategies are somehow orthogonal. On the one hand, we are experimenting with an approach which is that we rely on a crowd consisting of people that do not have paleographic. On the other, we are trying to develop tools for assisting experts when they are available to insert annotations in a collaborative manner, like other tools that are available in literature. So let me just thank for your attention. And let me give you a quick reference to the website of the project, where you can find papers and news covering the project results. And looking forward for the DRR question, the Q&R session.
Wonderful, thank you, Donatella. And as we move things along, I'd like to hand it over to Noelani Arista. Over to you.
Aloha ia o ko pakahi a pau. Aloha mai ka puka ana o ka la I Mashpee. I ke kau ana o ka la I ke kai o ka ena. Aloha kākou. Mahalo for the invitation to speak today at the Colonial North America at Harvard Library Symposium. I marama ia I ka aina ho'i ole o ka po'e wampana. Aloha. Hello ka mo'olelo. Histories are multitudinous or many. The challenge of Hawaiian language archives. In my work as a historian frequently centers on the textual production of Hawaiian knowledge from traditional literary and performative genres of mo'olelo, oli, mele, pule, song, history, prayer, story, to 19th century expressions of Hawaiian knowledge. I study the transmediation of mo'olelo from oral performance into written and published text. More recently, I'm concerned with the way the alluring promise of digital mediums offer my community new modes of organizing and relating to ancestral knowledge, preservation, and production. One of the research questions often guiding my work is, are the rules and pedagogies that disciplined Ike Hawaii or Hawaiian knowledge in community, supplied authority, wove together social relations, and secured the veracity of knowledge, rendered obsolete by digital mediums? Are the rules and pedagogies that disciplined our knowledges in community while digital mediums allow new virtual communities to share knowledge, they often do so without customary practices that secure relations between learners and teachers, kumu, elders, kupuna, and knowledge itself. Another question that guides our work is, how can we create opportunities for access that are more relational and less extractive? I wanted to begin by touching briefly on one of the projects that prepared me for the work that I continue to do today. I was hired to work on the newspaper indexing and cataloging project headed by Edith Mckenzie, here pictured, a team that included native speaking elders, other graduate students, and Hawaiian language professors to systematically catalog and summarize individual articles in issues of Hawaiian language newspapers. The dates 1999 and 2004 approximate the years that I worked on the project. This project occurred at a time when we were writing our summaries by hand, before laptop computers and digital dictionaries were widely available. If I came across a word that was not in any dictionary in the newspaper, we had to discuss the passages with the native speakers on hand, and we annotated our personal hard copy dictionaries on the spot. Making the decision to categorize a piece of writing or a composition to summarize in English required the skill to move fluidly between Hawaiian and English. For some context, the Hawaiian Language Textual Archive is the largest Indigenous language archive in native North America and the Polynesian Pacific. There were over 100 different Hawaiian language newspapers published in the period between 1834 and 1948. And Hawaiian people themselves engaged widely in the production of Hawaiian orature, chants, genealogies, letters, and manuscripts over the course of the 19th century. In fact, Harvard libraries steward manuscript collections on the Sandwich Islands, its missions, the whaling and sandalwood trade, and Hawaiian governance, as do many other repositories in New England, illustrating America's oceanic reach beyond the continent from the late 18th century onwards. I really appreciated Stephen Curley's map of how the distance between Mashpee Wampanoag and Harvard libraries. You can imagine the distance between Hawaii and the archival resources that connect to Hawaiian people. Hawaiian language textual archives are voluminous, challenging prevailing assumptions that written archives in Indigenous languages are scarce, and that Hawaiian knowledge and knowledge production was strictly oral. So my thinking of the intersection between machine learning and Hawaiian structures of knowledge was trained for several years working on this project and others run by native speakers to aggregate small archives of chant, organize our data through transcription and translation, and present these findings in essays and public presentations. The Hawaiian Evangelical Association papers that I'm currently working on from the HEA, whose objectives broadly are to transcribe all these letters in the collection, and you can see how many there are at the top of the screen. Create finding aids in the Hawaiian language and English, which has never been attempted. Write biographies of the Hawaiian writers, and you can see there are over 1,000 individual writers in the collection, as a way to increase accessibility to Kanaka Maoli writers. Our project seeks to be people-centered by training transcribers, graduate, undergraduate, high school students who are fluent in Hawaiian, church and community members. For us, the papers are not the only focus of our project. Here, the divide between patron and archive is sort of less useful. We also seek to increase visibility of intellectual and spiritual production of Kanaka Maoli, Hawaiian people from the past and in our presence. And the next level of the project would be to create subject heading categories in the Hawaiian language. So you can see how actually training transcribers who are attentive to the material really contribute to that next level of subject heading categories in Hawaiian language. For us, sources are not just evidence. Viewing the collection through the eyes of descendants, community, and church members, we view manuscripts not as source material, but as revelatory of language use, cultural, intellectual, spiritual, and historical documents for ongoing indigenization and education. Sources are entry points of connection and relation. And because colonialism has impacted our ability to read and interpret texts, in the early 20th century, Hawaiian was forbidden as a language of instruction. That really adversely affected our population of speakers. Many of us who speak and read Hawaiian now have learned it either in high school immersion programs or in college, as I did. So the process of transcription and reading is necessary to train people who are building these skill sets and who will contribute deeper understanding and future scholarship to our community. That being said, we may not be willing to cede these acts of reclamation to machine learning. Because we are at the stage of developing and training the people who can read enormous amounts of text, organize it, and interpret it in order to intervene in a colonial historiography that has erased the existence of this massive archive. The relationship between the two akua ki'i in this image by Joshua Evie Lake allows us to imagine the challenges of intervening in a colonial historiographic narrative of Christianity and its relation to the Hawaiian religious past. Often characterized as a harsh binary of us versus them, Hawaiian Christian archives are not prioritized because they are viewed by many as inherently tainted or colonized sources. But as we have pointed out, the majority of the writers in this collection are Hawaiian, and they are writing in the Hawaiian language. The HEA project team is organized by two Hawaiian archivists, here pictured on the left, Kanani Repun and Carol Silva, who are records management consultants, and between them have over 40 years of work in Indigenous librarianship. Our project manager and transcribers are all fluent in Hawaiian, with one working on his fluency. These project team members, 6 in all, including myself, are all Kanaka Maoli. Both of the Native Hawaiian archivists came out of retirement to work on this project. And Kanani Rapun, pictured here on the left in blue, is the archivist that actually introduced me to working in an archive when I was a graduate student over 20 years ago. I'm happy to have her employed on this project. Our orientation to the sources matter. We do not label these collections as treasure troves or seek to market the source material as pearls of knowledge or momi, because we do not want to encourage extractive practices of data mining. We are not ethnographers or anthropologists searching for revelatory content on Hawaiian culture. We are also studying the context, genres, and language as it changed over time. Ethical standards which we apply to our practice are at times dictated by the nature of our sources, as directed by Hawaiian customary practice. Few opportunities to train machine learning. For us, our project, community, language, and AI. Community, we try to put community first. There are few opportunities to train machine learning in Indigenous language. I was happy to see a couple other presenters earlier today speak about that process to train automated speech recognition or reading Hawaiian language manuscripts, for example. Even though our corpus is large, with this project, we have a stunning variety of different kinds of handwriting, because during the period, people are learning literacy. So we have all stages, and as you can see from this manuscript, all manner of kind of problems with that the machine is going to engage when it looks at this kind of a document. We're looking to create a standard with our project that fit diverse language communities. Funding for these projects based in Indigenous communities is often scarce, so partnerships with institutions holding collections like Harvard are really necessary. Computational approaches must be formulated with linguistic and cultural fluency built in to make sure that Indigenous methods of organizing our knowledges are primary. Projects should proceed in relation with knowledgeable trained people from Indigenous communities, and so that the biases commonplace in the development of AI systems will be addressed from the outset. With Hawaii, you can imagine one of the main problems we have is people imagine, well, it's an Indigenous language, there aren't a lot of sources. The opposite is true in Hawaiian, but also that Hawaii has often been seen as sort of this paradise, sort of blank, where no like sort of important, rich intellectual production is produced. Finally, I just wanted to acknowledge how I got here. From the elders that trained me in language on newspaper and research projects, and also my work with Jason Edward Lewis, professor of computation design and director of the Indigenous Initiative for Indigenous Futures at Concordia University. I met him 4 years ago, and since then I've worked on several projects sponsored by IIF as a contributing author to the MIT award-winning essay, Making Kin with the Machines, as a knowledge keeper on 2 video game design workshops in Hawaii, and as part of a project team that prototyped an image recognition program in Hawaiian on the Indigenous Protocol and AI Working Group. The ways that these engagements will enrich my historical work in Hawaiian language archives will, I imagine, broaden and deepen in time. My thanks to the IP and AI Working Group, the HEA project team, and HMCS exec team, and Evie Lake for the use of his image in my presentation. Mahalo.
Thanks so much, Noelani. We have one more presentation, so I will hand it off to Matt Cook. Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Stu, and thanks to my fellow presenters and the organizers of the conference. It's a great honor to be here and presenting alongside so many inspiring speakers. I'm going to talk from the perspective of a librarian today, which is to say I'm a relative novice on the topic of AI. I'm not a researcher in AI or a developer in AI, but I have got the opportunity to experiment with these tools. And the point of the talk is really to empower my fellow librarians, especially those that are collections adjacent, to begin thinking about AI not as a tool of the future, but a tool of today, and to look at a handful of tools that are actually available for use today, including some that were mentioned. I'm going to go through this in 2 phases. First, I'm going to look at some preliminary experiments that I've engaged in and the associated tools, and then how they vary across dimensions like openness, but also cost and technical difficulty in configuring these tools. And then I'm going to shift focus a little bit and talk about how the accuracy of the outputs of AI can be controlled in terms of quality with sense-making technology and specifically immersive visualization technology, but also how we can empower the end user, which would be the research faculty in this case, to see not just handwriting transcription outputs, but also images and videos and models and text mining outputs side by side. So the idea here is to fit and contextualize what we're all talking about in the bigger picture, but also connect it to other emerging technologies. So first, some experiments. I was working with and have been working with Harvard Theater Collection's XIL book collection. You can see an example on the right. They call it the Extra Illustrated Edition collection. This is sort of a collage material books, and it is not searchable on the catalog yet, but the card catalog has been digitized. The problem with that is this is more than 81,000 cards from over 100 years, representing many, many different hands. So that's sort of the problem that got me thinking about these technologies is how do you make this collection, which is very rich and includes diverse materials over a long period of time, searchable using existing technologies and do it in a way that doesn't require a whole bunch of custom coding. The first tool that I began experimenting with is called Simple HTR from Harold Scheidel. This is completely open source, super well documented. You can use it today. It's based on TensorFlow and trained on the IM handwriting database, which is one of the limitations. The accuracy out of the box for this tool, mid 70% accuracy, is not great. It's not ready for production out of the box, and it takes some pre-processing. So you kind of have to have the technical chops to do deslanting and line segmentation and image pre-processing, but it has potential, and the cost savings, if you have development resources, are there, completely open source. So that's the value there. We mentioned Transcribus earlier. My colleagues are really the experts here. They did a full report. This is an internal document, and you can see their names listed there. I've experimented with it a little bit, been very impressed. The accuracy is great, indeed an improvement over Simple HTR, and it has fantastic integration potential, which is to say it can flow into our existing library systems. This is a complete solution. Again, we've discussed it a little bit. There's an online portal. You can log in, delegate permissions, annotate, and then run transcription software all through their cloud portal. I've found that the costs, at least recently, the new pricing model is quite prohibitive for the entire XL collection. Again, 81,000 handwritten card catalog cards. I would be looking at around about $25,000 out of the box to transcribe, which is not the end of the world, but it is something to think about. Now, as a third alternative, we have an open source throughput tool from Mike Huck at Caltech Libraries that allows you to batch upload handwritten transcription or handwritten documents like the cards to third-party transcription services in the cloud. I use Microsoft Cognitive Services, specifically the computer vision resource, and more specifically their recently updated Read API, which will give you fantastic accuracy at a very low cost, but you're sending your data to these big third-party corporations. You don't know their models are closed. This is essentially a black box solution if you're interested in getting started quickly and seeing what the results might be. So these are the sort of dimensions that I've been looking at this technology along. You have totally DIY, completely open source GitHub repository on the left with Simple HTR, and then a combination on the far right, but it uses Google, it uses Amazon, it uses Microsoft on the far right-hand side. So these are different things to consider, again, as an information professional approaching these technologies for the first time. I'm gonna focus in on accuracy, specifically moving forward for the second part of the talk. And Padilla specifically mentions that we need to keep humans in the loop to judge accuracy of outputs. This is sort of quality control. These are anti-bias measures. And this is a way for the end user, in this case, the faculty researcher, to begin to make sense of these outputs. Even the outputs, if human readable, are huge, and we're talking about collections like Excel or CNA. And then as we bring in other material, other media, we're gonna have tons of data to work through as humans side by side. So we're talking about sound and image classification, topic modeling, and structure analysis that can be presented to the user along with handwriting transcriptions. How do we begin to make sense of this, both internally in the library as quality control specialists, let's say, but also as we're feeding these tools and presenting these tools to our faculty, consultees, stakeholders, how do we allow them to make sense of such large data and media collections? Well, one way to do it is to use a model from human-computer interaction known as sense making. You can see the sort of early experiments with this were kind of hilarious looking back, even though this is only 10 years ago. These are like large screen display experiments that people would run to see, okay, what is the best way to set up a computer workstation in order for the analyst to interpret a large amount of information? Okay, well, that's evolved since the 2010s into something known as immersive analytics. So if you take the concept of sense making, which you can see Scarbez here defines as the foraging of patterns and insights from huge data sets, which is exactly what we're talking about when we're looking at these big AI outputs and multimedia outputs. If you apply sense making models to virtual reality, for example, you have the concept of immersive analytics. And where this is valuable, again, is to increase the bandwidth of analysis, the efficiency of analysis. So what VR and AR gives us is this sort of naturalistic interfacing. It tracks your head and your body. You have stereoscopic vision in the system, in the display, and a wide field of view. And in controlled conditions, in the lab, this has been shown to translate to efficiencies along certain task types like search, identification, description, and comparison. So these are the sort of generalizable benefits that apply across disciplines that can help you engage with the outputs of handwriting transcription or image classification or topic modeling. I can talk about the other sort of cool down the line stuff in the Q&A, but it also allows you to do things with objects and data that would be impossible with the physical counterparts. Here's a little simulation I threw together. It's a GIF, so forgive the graininess, but in the center, you'll actually see when it loops back a Transcribus viewing window. So we're looking at a transcription from the collection. This is actually CNA, and the page I'm looking at deals with the construction of Long Wharf in the Boston Harbor. And what I tried to do here is superpose a whole bunch of different media formats side by side along with the transcription to give the researcher a sense of context and to illustrate the full range of media that's available in the collection. So we have high definition video, we have archival photographs, we have artistic outputs, we have a text mining output, we have a map output, and then you also see that sort of tools there, that's actually colonial era hand tools because they're talking about construction of the wharf in this case. So here are the main takeaways. Prototyping efforts like this can be initiated without dedicated development teams or specialized equipment. So librarians can begin to prototype these tools. Library collections like the Extra Illustrated Edition collection and Colonial North America represent test beds and tools for systems that transcend discipline and media. That's sort of the internal focus here. And then the external focus, the faculty researcher, can benefit through high bandwidth interfaces like immersive visualization that allow researchers to make sense of AI-derived outputs from mixed media collections. And that's all I have, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to Matt and all of the speakers. I believe it's 12:15, and we've traded the incredible richness of these talks for the Q&A. So I thought what I might do is just kind of add one brief summarizing point and then hand it back to Megan for the kind of special ending to the event. One of the aspects of a thread that kind of persisted throughout the talks for me was the fact that both crowdsourcing and AI, and using crowdsourcing and AI to transcribe and interpret archival content is introducing new participants into the process of description, and may represent something of a shift from some of the traditional roles in the kind of archival description process. By including, in some cases, the anonymous crowd or the trained machine. I appreciated Matt talking from the perspective of a librarian. I appreciated Noelani kind of noting the expertise of her team as archivists and the importance of including Indigenous methods of organizing knowledge. And in fact, all of the presentations addressed the kind of the community orientation of some of these new methods. So what I would leave you all with is to think about how the role of the librarian and the archivist is evolving and the importance of that role as we move forward in using these new methods, and what some of the opportunities and challenges are for blending the engagement with community with the increase of automation. So I'm grateful to the panelists, a really exciting slate of presentations, and thank you very much. And I'm going to hand it over to Megan now to, I believe, to introduce the final phase of our event.
Thank you, Stu, very much. And thank you to the panelists and to Stu for this very informative session. A lot is underway and there's a lot to consider in all of this. We just ask those of you in the audience to please continue to add questions into the Q&A, and we'll be certain to share them with the speakers. And again, we'll try to get back to people at a later point. Before we get to the real close of the symposium, I'd like to introduce two special guests that we have with us today, Jeffrey Page and Diane Paulus. Jeffrey Page is the Gross Low Lecturer on Theater, Dance, and Media at Harvard. He is co-director and choreographer of the American Repertory Theater's revival or reinvention of 1776. And Diane Paulus, Tony Award-winning director, is the Terry and Bradley Bloom Artistic Director of the American Repertory Theater Works. She is co-director of the upcoming production of 1776. Our project team saw some real similarities between the Colonial North America at Harvard Library Digitization project and the potential it had to encourage a relook at history with the work underway by the ART for a revision of 1776. Jeffrey and Diane will speak briefly about what 1776, the show, is communicating to its audience, and what 1776, the year, and ultimately what the event continues to communicate to us hundreds of years later. And they'll introduce a short 6-minute clip from their multimedia conversation, 1776, The Audacity to Exist. So Jeffrey and Diane, thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hey, Diane. I haven't said hello to you today.
I know. Hello, hello. We're so happy to be here and so happy to speak briefly about this production that we have been dreaming of. Just for your reference, this was scheduled to premiere at the American Repertory Theater in May of 2020. And due to the pandemic, it's all been on hold. We have continued to work on the show, to dream about it, to develop it. And the video you're going to see in a few minutes was one output that happened as a result of this hiatus participation in an event that the Center for Democracy, I'm getting that wrong. It was the Center for Popular Democracy invited us to create a conversation around our production with two of our Harvard faculty, Professor Timothy McCarthy and Professor Vincent Brown. But I would love to throw this to Jeffrey if you want to say a few words about your inspiration and your excitement and your interest in particular as it relates to history with this production, and then I'll follow up with a few further words.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Diane. I did not I did not know much about 1776 before Diane brought it to me. So I went about a ton of research, and it opened up a world of possibility for me, which I deeply appreciated. Diane, Ryan McKittrick, and myself, we teach a course on the power of the American musical and its relevancy here at Harvard. And through the course, it's been tremendously enlightening for me. And it's opened up new understanding about what this musical is doing, that I believe that it's doing, and I'm tremendously interested in it. I think what the musical is attempting to do, and what I would like to add inside of this particular production is this idea of the occluded communities in America, the communities that have been disappeared, the communities that have been invisible, the communities that have worked underneath the floorboards in order to upkeep the foundations of the system. And I believe that this musical, in both form and content, is really leaning and pointing at something greater. The artistic perspective of this music is pointing at this idea of the invisible. So so I'm really interested in what that means, and I'm interested in thinking about what it means through the voicing of the founding fathers, through really opening up and thinking about the Declaration of Independence and how does it fit inside of the body? How does it fit inside of choreography and stagecraft and design? And I'm really excited to work with Diane on this and to figure out a new perspective of how we are including people who have been historically left out of the narrative.
Thanks, Jeffrey, for that. I just want to add to that for some context. 1776 won the Tony Award in 1968, so it was written in the late 60s at another moment of counterculture and kind of critique of our country. I think the original writers, Peter Stone and Sherman Edwards, were in their own way pointing to the human predicament of all men are created equal and the foundation of our country based on the Declaration of Independence. The show, if you're not familiar with it, dramatizes a debate in the very kind of last build-up of the narrative of Thomas Jefferson's clause that he wrote in his original draft about the abhorrence of slavery. Of course, he was talking mostly about the king in England at this time, and kind of projecting a lot of that consternation about slavery onto the king, while we know that he had an enslaved person, Robert Hemings, attending to his side in the apartment he was staying at a few blocks from Independence Hall as he was writing and drafting that original document. But the show goes into this, and we see the dramatization of how this clause was cut out of the Declaration of Independence. And for me, I just wanted to say this was a piece of American history I was not familiar with. When I first read the libretto of the musical, I thought this might have been made up to make good drama. And when I did my research, I obviously learned that it was actually a history, and it put me into an interrogation of my own background, my own study, my own exposure to American history through high school and college. I was a Harvard undergrad, social studies major, and I was puzzled and troubled by the fact that I had not been aware of this piece of our American history, this compromise that was part of the founding of our country. And so part of my interest in bringing this show back in what we thought would be 2020, now probably 2022, was to think about how theater can be a living piece of reckoning with our collective past, and in this case, in particular, American history. So very interested in how we at the ART are partnering with Harvard University in a much larger initiative around this production. This is not just about doing a show. This is really about theater as public history, theater as a way to educate and catalyze dialogue, to help us shift our gaze and see things in new ways. And I think art is uniquely positioned in some cases to do that in very powerful ways. The piece you're going to see now, the video that we're going to segue to, is a conversation. Jeffrey is in the conversation. Our professors from Harvard, as I mentioned, are there, and a number of our cast members. One thing to say about the casting, which is the last thing I'll say, we have cast a group of wonderful, incredible human beings that represent a multiple cross-section of race, gender, ethnicity. And I think the estates of Sherman Edwards and Peter Stone were really supportive of this choice. And it was our way to say, we're going to look at this historical musical about a moment, a historical music from the 60s, about a piece of American history from 1776, but we are going to contain inside it, as Jeffrey said, embodied in it with people alive today that represent America of today. So it's that tension that we are putting forward for our audience to reckon and reconcile with. So you'll hear a bit of this discussion in the video you're going to see now. I'm very excited for future conversations this will catalyze on our campus. So I think we should go to the videotape now.
This play dramatizes the creation and the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So Tim and Vince, as our historians, I'd love to kick it off with you both. What does 1776 even mean?
Well, I like the way you put that, because it's just a number, right? And one question is, why is that such a loaded number? Why does it symbolize anything? I always think that to think about when I see people with numbers tattooed on their bodies, like when they have their birth dates tattooed on their arm, that means something really specific and really personal to them. Well, 1776 is a highly loaded symbolic number like that symbolizes the birth of our nation, of the United States, right? The Declaration of Independence was penned in 1776 and announced to the world that the 13 colonies of the British Empire in North America were going to break off, right? And that essentially committed the United States to a war against the empire that they didn't know how it was going to go. We tend to think of these kinds of dates as markers in historic moments, right? Which is in 1776, everything changed and a new nation began. When in actuality, 1776 just marks the predicament of these people trying to sort out, right? What are we going to do with our situation in the British Empire? They didn't know how it was going to turn out. We look back and we think this just indicates, oh, of course the United States is going to be born. Nuh-uh. This is a fraught moment. Nobody knows how it's going to go. It's a crisis, in fact.
And yet 1776 is that moment of protest that becomes profound and prophetic. It is important in that way, and you don't want to lose that. I mean, the United States was, at the time, the first nation state to write itself into existence through written act of protest that was an act of civil disobedience. And once they put it down in writing, it's hard to take that back, which is part of the predicament that the Declaration sets in motion, because they're making all sorts of claims about equality and freedom and rights and liberties and so forth. And they have not yet gotten that sorted out, but it's in writing and now it's in motion.
I just want to say that one of the most striking impacts from our work, our beginning work with 1776, is this exact discussion, that this is not just a historical moment to learn about and know about and iconicize these men as founding fathers, but the document as a form of protest, as a form of rebellion, as feeling a certain legislation, certain constructs, certain ways of existing that were no longer tolerable. And these men came into this room and said, we're going to put our lives on the line in order to make systemic change. And that has shifted, and this is a term that we use in the room, shifted my perspective on the way I take on this history that is complicated and contradictory and flawed and full of myths. And when I engage in this exercise of looking at it for what it is, the human nature of what it is, it really impacts me. And there's a through line that's drawn all the way to today that I think is so relevant, and we can take in the history so differently and include so many voices if we look at it from that point of view of a human dilemma.
Nika, one of the things too about your reframing of that as a protest moment is that it allows us to understand the founding of the nation, not as just a kind of conservative project that was overseen in real ways by the elite people of the time, who were all white, all male, all people of property, of education, which was rare at that time. These were elites. Certainly it was a very small representation of the larger population, and that this protest moment, especially the Declaration, allows us to understand that at the founding of the country are multiple political traditions. One of them is resistance, one of which is radicalism, one of which is dissent, that then gets picked up by every generation subsequent to it, including our own. And so that protest moment and the Declaration of Independence as a written act of civil disobedience allows us to claim, all of us, especially all of us here, right? A radical tradition, a protest tradition, dissent tradition, that's as American as anything else.
The Declaration of Independence itself and the revolution cannot be limited to the intentions of the founding fathers, right? There were lots of people in play at the time, because enslaved people took the revolutionary moment and did their own thing with it. I mean, not many people know that 15,000 enslaved Black people actually sided with the British, because the revolution created an opportunity for them to seek freedom in that way. And about 5,000 sided with the Patriots, right? So by initiating this moment in which new things became possible, a lot of people could strike for freedom in ways that the founding fathers didn't even intend. And following on that, the Declaration of Independence is something that declared the principle that all men at the time, but people interpreted as human beings, are created equal, was something people could use ever after to make a claim on equality, to make a claim on freedom, even if the original drafters of the document didn't intend that.
Thank you very much. It's exciting to see that clip. It's exciting to just imagine what is going to happen in this play in 2022 as we understand it. So we will all look forward to that very much. Thank you very much to Jeffrey and Diane for introducing that to us today. And I'm going to turn the program over right now to Francisca Frey, who will wrap things up.
Thank you, Megan. With this wonderful preview of things to look forward to, we have come to the end of our symposium. I'm Francisca Frey, Chief of Staff for Harvard Library. I would like to take the opportunity to thank all the colleagues from across the Harvard Library who contributed to this project over the past decade. Without their efforts, this project would never have made it beyond the initial idea. I would also like to thank our donors who generously provided major support for this multi-year endeavor: Arcadia, the Polanski Foundation, James B. Adler through the Adler Preservation Fund, and Peter Darrow and William Nutting. While the digitization part of this initiative is completed, Worlds of Change, Colonial North America at Harvard Library will continue to inspire Harvard Library and our peers in how we explore primary source materials in classrooms, both virtually and in person, and how we collaborate with peer institutions in the research landscape. Let me close with a big thank you to all our panelists, speakers, and moderators for their highly engaging presentations and discussions over the past 3 days. They shared ideas about what happens after digitization, as digitized manuscript collections are used in new contexts and artificial intelligence allows for innovative engagement with the content. I would also like to thank Grace Strong and Hannah Hack for planning and running this event, and thank all of you for attending. We will let you know when the recordings of the 3 sessions have been posted, and hope you will make good and frequent use of all the materials available at Worlds of Change, Colonial North America at Harvard Library. Stay safe and goodbye.